I can see Jessica, I can see Sarah, I can see Rich. And Nate.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we're ready to go. If you want to start off, and I can read the announcement.
Okay, yeah, let's read the announcement first, and then we'll take the roll call to open the meeting.
Very good. This is the May 13th, 2020 Finance Committee meeting for the town of Yarmouth. This is a remote participation meeting pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, section 18, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing a limitation on the number of people that may gather in one location. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. Specific information such as instructions and guidelines for remote by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town website, www.yarmouth.ma.us. For the public portion of this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or listen and participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner. You may watch a live stream on the Yarmouth YouTube channel. Audio, video, and screen, or you can join the meeting hosted in Zoom by using the following link with the meeting ID of 814-1619-8252. Audio, video, and screen sharing functions are disabled during the public sessions, but requests to participate may be made by using the raise hand function. You may also listen to the meeting by calling in on a phone number to either 253-215-8782 or 301-715-8592 and enter the meeting ID. Audio, video, and screen sharing functions will also be disabled, but smartphone callers may be able to participate by using raise hand function, and landline callers will be able to listen but not participate verbally. However, you may use *9 to use a raise hand function from a landline. You may submit comments to the town using the following email, publiccomment@yarmouth.ma.us, and the email will be monitored during the meeting, and the moderator or host will alert the board chair of any relevant comments. Meeting materials are attached to this agenda and available online at the Yarmouth website and will be displayed online at the meeting. And with that, you're all set to go, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Rich. We will open the meeting by taking a roll call. Make sure we have, I can't see all the faces. Sarah?
Here.
Jessica?
Here.
Robert?
Yeah.
Nate?
Here.
You're there. Brian?
Here.
George?
Yeah.
Not here.
George is in the waiting room. He'll be right in.
And Jack? Okay, Jack's been having some problems with a couple things, so hopefully maybe he can join us during the conference. And you said George is waiting? Was it? Okay. We'll start with the minutes. I think everybody got a copy of the minutes from April 25th. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? They were sent out once or twice, actually. Any commentary? Hi, George. George,
Hey.
I just need you're here, right?
Yep, I think.
Okay, yeah, I see you. You're there.
He needs a haircut too.
Commentary on the minutes or a motion to accept?
I'll give you a motion to accept.
I didn't hear that.
I'll give you a motion to accept. This is Nate.
Okay, motion made by Nate to accept. Do we have a second?
I'll second Jessica.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Any further discussion? Motion is made and seconded to approve. Sarah?
Aye.
Jessica?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Robert?
Aye.
Nate?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Well, I myself. So the motion is carried 7-0. We'll move on to the articles and had a chance to watch. I believe that Dan will probably give the same update as last night to the Board of Selectmen. So, and hopefully this is let's hope this is the last iteration of the articles. And there could be a couple twists on the articles, depending on whether we have a town meeting on June 22nd in terms of the budget, but we'll take that at some other point. Dan, would you just like to give us an update on the articles?
Yeah, sure. Thank you and good evening to everyone. Last night, which was presented to the board for a draft, basically, I think from the last time you saw it, we added back the CPC articles because the CPC committee had met and voted to request that their articles reappear back on the warrant. They were concerned that there's some town wages that get paid through that. And there's also, more importantly, construction related projects that they didn't want to see get delayed that could use funding if we get a town meeting this year. Additionally, another add-on was a provision that allows the assessor to enter into a 5-year contract to facilitate a better price for doing the reevaluations the town has to undertake. It was impressed upon us by the finance director that was something that needed to happen, so that went back on. And then, Rich, we're still waiting to hear from town council potentially about the tourism preservation account and whether or not, or what level of staff resources we can apply to that account. When we get that, we'll amend the article if there is a possibility to do that, and we'll get further guidance. I think other than that, Rich, is there anything major that was added to it since the last time we saw it?
Well, the petitions are added back, but
Oh, the petitions, yeah, from the 3 citizens, yeah. So the story goes with that, if we're able to have a town meeting on the 22nd and the citizen petitions are postponed indefinitely, the selectmen would need to agree to post those back on the special town meeting in the fall, or that would require for those articles to reappear in the fall. I believe it's 100 signature requirement for that. So there was some conversation last night, and I'm sure the selectmen would sponsor that. So the bigger question becomes for us, based on, I think what we would fall under is phase 1 guidance, that whether or not we can have a town meeting. Okay, I don't know that yet. I'll probably know for sure by next Tuesday night, because phase 1 reopening guidance, which would include an update for assembly, public assembly, should be included for a Monday night or Monday morning press conference with the governor releases his plan. So that's where we stand on that topic now. If we were not able to hold a town meeting by special legislation that was passed a month or so ago, we would revert to a 1/12 budget based on fiscal 20 spending appropriations until such time you could hold a town meeting.
Well, I guess since we're on the subject, we might as well get to it. You also did mention that should we not be able to hold a town meeting, there might be legislation allowing the Board of Selectmen, and I guess my question would be, where does the Finance Committee come in? Allowing the Board of Selectmen to pass simply a financial budget in lieu of a town meeting.
Yeah, there's draft legislation that's being prepared that had a number of provisions. I guess the 1/12 budget situation didn't really go over that well with the towns. And that could be because, as I heard on a call just recently before this meeting, a statewide call with Senator Warren's people, all the town managers are on that one. Most everybody's doing what we're doing. They're projecting somewhere between a 20 and a 40% receipt cuts to their budget, something along the lines of what we're proposing. And I think the 1/12 budget just doesn't get you there. So that's why they wanted additional flexibility to allow whatever level of appropriation that you put forth as an administration to be approved, so that July 1, you don't lose any grounds. Because if we did a 1/12 budget and we're proposing to you in the numbers you'll see tonight, $6 million plus reduction. We wouldn't get there with a 112 budget. And if it took us till October, November to have a town meeting, we wouldn't be able to support a 112 spending plan.
Okay, so we'll just one other item, I guess, is that we are expected to present our recommendations on the budgets one way or the other on June 2nd to the board.
Yeah, so that's the public hearing on the budget. So we would anticipate next week at the selectmen's meeting, essentially, except for some commentary they will provide at that night, we'll have what we think to be our plan from an administrative point of view on the budget and what we need to do and where we need to get the money from.
Okay, because tonight, a lot of what you'll present, and I think the Board of Selectmen did not take a vote last night on the budget, the budget items per
Right.
se.
They had given us guidance at the last meeting that in totaled over $6 million in reductions.
Right, and that's what the question will be for the Finance Committee tonight, is much of the information will be the information we have seen with maybe a little bit more detail behind it, and maybe some adjustments, but at some point we do have to take a position. So the question will be, as we proceed through this meeting, do we take that position tonight? If we don't, first of all, we may want to have another meeting anyway, but if we don't, one way or the other, we need to have a meeting prior to June 2nd. Is that accurate, Dan?
That would be correct, yep.
Yeah, right, okay. Any questions on the article portion of this? Is the revised set of articles, I think it's in the presentation material?
It was from last night's Board of Selectmen. It was in the
Yeah.
packet that was emailed out, correct?
Okay, so I guess I'd ask that at some point this committee have access to that, so we
Yeah.
can see the articles?
Sure.
The most recent articles, okay. So if there's no question, we'll move right into the budget discussion.
For that one, I will toss that over to Rich and Ed Centio have been working diligently to get to that number. We were at the phase right now where, based on the guidance we got from the selectmen last week, there was some further detail related to the budget reductions that we needed to get out of each department. Rich has been in the process over the last few days of having those one-on-one meetings with the departments. So I'll turn the meeting over at this point to Rich, and he can update you as to where we're at.
Yeah, I'll share screen with you in a minute on some of the detail. And it just occurred to me that I don't know if I've sent this to you, which I probably ought to send it to you as well, which I can do right after this meeting. So there was a summarized budget summary page, and what I did, just as a way of an update to the selectmen, is I sent it to them with the detail, all the detailed budget accounts in one spot, so they could see, what had been proposed, and a column for what we're proposing to reduce, and then arriving at the revised budget. And if you might recall that budget summary page, what I showed them last night was a marked up version of that, showing that what we originally showed to them a couple weeks ago, at this point, we think we can achieve. So that included some budget reductions, and we think we've achieved those budget reductions. And some additional funding from other available funds. We've identified those, and we've come in a little bit higher than what we said we thought we could do. So we're on track to be able to do with what we had presented to them and what they voted for us to pursue. And so that's looking good. I wasn't in a position last night to present it because I had to talk to several departments, and I'll be wrapping that up tomorrow. And the plan is, when I wrap that up, to represent the retooled budget in the same format that I presented to you guys and to the selectmen previously. So you might recall we had a presentation on a PowerPoint, had a budget summary, showed the funding sources and the appropriations and in some level of detail. So I'm going to update that, and I'm going to compare it what the last version looked like that we were all planning to go to town meeting with, the previous discussions versus what it looks like now, so people can see what's changed. And so that'll be part of the presentation. And also, of course, part of that is, to the extent there's changes, I'll have a slide on the detail of those changes. So for instance, you'll see, I don't know if you recall that budget presentation, but there was a line there for town appropriations. You might have said something about $80 million or something like that. Well, now it's going to say something different. For sake of argument, say it says $79 million. So the change is $1 million. So I have a slide that details what makes up that $1 million, so people can identify what the changes were. So there'll be that presentation, and we are going to be putting together, we previously issued a budget book to everybody, and we're updating the traditional budget book and be representing that. So the same level of detail and same review that you've had in the past, you'll be able to have that as well. And finally, as part of all that, looking at our town website, not only will we send it to you as a committee, but I'll make sure we get all those posted to our website. So you can go to the website and the public can go to the website and see what was originally proposed, the presentations associated with that, and then what the revised budget looks like, and presentation on what those changes represent. So let me just show you this is what I had sent to the selectmen. And this isn't really, ready for prime time as far as deep discussion, but this is what we had talked to the selectmen about, and they voted that we ought to pursue items A through D. And so the big pieces of that are down here under D, roadway funding and the capital expenditures have been cut out of the budget with the idea that we'll revisit that in the fall and replace that with free cash or other reserves if we see that we're getting through this. Again, I may reiterate just before I get into the detail of this. The idea was we needed to cut our local receipts budget somewhat close to around 1/3. And so again, we've been able to achieve that. And the way we've achieved it is by addressing these items, the roadways and the capital. Budget reductions, we've achieved that. These potential funding sources, and we've provided for including these funding sources. I think we'll find that we don't need to include all of them, but that'll be a decision the selectmen and yourselves can make when I get this in front of you. If you want to include all of them or not include some of them, but I'll be able to present that to you. And it also includes these cuts up here under item A, which is basically all the additions that had been added in FY21. These were all new items that appeared that we had discussed throughout the year, in addition to wastewater funding. And then these last three things represented with the further additional time. For instance, we didn't need the full 10% on increase in insurance. It came in at about 7.5%. So we were able to cut that back a little bit. For the last several years, we hadn't been spending what's been budgeted for veterans benefits. So in talking to the Veterans District, they felt comfortable that that was adequate. That reduction, that was still more than adequate to cover what they expected. And we're expecting contract settlements to be a little bit less than what originally we planned 6 or so months ago. So all those items A through D are what's going into the budget. And like I said, I will send this to you with the blue representing, the update. The blue items are basically me indicating to Dan for his information where I stood on all these items. And the answer is we're able to do all these, and you'll have and you and the selectmen will have a little bit of flexibility in adjusting this once we pull this all together and finalize it at the end, by the end of this week. Also part of this was additional available funds that we can apply. So it showed the detail of that and what those extra amounts were. And then this is what I was talking about earlier. I just put all the accounts into one spot, each line item, and showed where we were previously. and then what the reductions were over here to arrive at a final adjusted budget. And these are what will be reflected in the updated budget books that we'll be able to get to you, and in the presentation on our budget, our updated budget presentation. But this lists all the accounts all in one spot that are in the general fund budget. And so I'm going through the process now of talking to all the departments and reviewing all these cuts and determining what's the impact associated with those cuts. And if I get to the bottom here, those cuts totaled 250,000 for the new items that we're not adding for the year. And then beyond the new items, 631,000 of actual cuts or reductions from prior budgets. And, most people are receptive and cooperative. Well, everybody really is receptive and cooperative. I shouldn't say that. But it's difficult for people, especially in some areas. So what I'll present, to the extent there's any flexibility in any of this when I pull this all together, there will be some wiggle room that yourselves and the selectmen will have the opportunity to say, if we just can't cut that much, or we should restore this, or we shouldn't use a certain funding source, there'll be an opportunity to, to some extent, not obviously to the full extent, to add a couple things back at your discretion.
So that's a summary of what I would call section A, correct, Rich?
That was A, B, and C. Actually, it was all A through D, but I should share that again. And
The
point something.
million plus is A.
Yeah. So on A here,
Yeah.
that represented various items, the new items, so to speak, less the savings on things we knew we could realize some savings on. That totaled $1,050,000. And if you went to the bottom of that sheet detailed sheet that I showed you,
Okay.
there's those items plus the wastewater and the contract settlements.
Okay.
There's that $1,050,000.
Okay. So exactly, that's the detail behind that number.
Right.
Right.
And then
Okay.
I think it was item C. There was 3 levels of budget cuts. The first one was 150, the second one was 150, and the third was 200,000. So that totaled 500,000 of budget cut. So after going through the exercise with Ed and talking to the departments, we came in at 631. So we're beyond what we thought, what we originally proposed. And that's why I say there will be some opportunity for the finance committee and the selectmen to, determine whether they think some of these cuts or funding sources ought to be used.
Okay.
And I neglected to show the first time, there is a summary at the end and I'll put this in the presentation when we get to the presentation, but this is just
Okay.
in progress look at what we're working on. Here's what we previously had. The elimination of the new money, so to speak, and then a column for the cuts and the revised and by department, and it shows the percentage reduction. Some are a little more dramatic than others because some are more discretionary than others. The human service funding, for example, is in the building department or health department, and that was not a town operation, so that was cut. That might be one of the areas that people might want to restore to some extent, so that might happen. But that's one reason why it shows such a big percentage. But when you eliminate things like that, what we're really looking at is most departments came in about a 1.5% to 2% cut, and it was pretty equally applied. Public safety came in, I think, about 1%. And again, I realized I haven't provided, so I will, as soon as we're done, I will email this to all of you tonight.
Questions? Okay.
So one of the other things not in that detail. Again, that's just kind of my working document that Ed and I are using and I sent out to the departments to work over. It's not the complete presentation that I'll provide, that I'll summarize and provide next week. But not on that sheet that would be in that presentation are other items that the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen might want to consider. So not only will there be potentially a little bit of wiggle room to add some things back or change what we've come up with, you always have the option of utilizing reserves. And so I'll put that in the presentation, the status of stabilization fund, or what we think might be some free cash, status of some articles that Ed and I are looking at. And then Robert, I know, has been asking about the overlay. And so I'll put that in there as well. But I guess what I would submit is Ed and I are going through this where we're recommending a level of caution. We've achieved a 33% reduction in local receipts, which is probably what most people are in the neighborhood of doing. Most communities are doing something similar. And we'll have an opportunity in the fall to revisit that. So if things look good, then maybe we don't need to do that. But there's a possibility that things are worse, and then you'd have to do something further. But I've also, in addition to the local receipt reduction, the other concern that Ed and I have is just property tax collection. So as you know, as you'll recall from the budget summary presentation in the past, we've got a balanced budget, and all of our appropriations and expenditures are balanced by recurring revenue sources. So we don't have any one-time things that aren't going to reappear next year that would give us a structural deficit. And so appropriations are funded by essentially three things: property taxes, local receipts, and other available funds. So that presumes that you're going to actually collect your property taxes. And so what's happened in communities, rundown communities across the country over the last 20 years, Detroit, places like that, their structural problem is, on paper, they had structurally balanced budgets because they, similarly had local receipts and property taxes and all things like that. And on paper, things would balance. But the problem is if people don't actually pay the property tax, you might have a balanced budget on paper, but you don't have the cash flow to pay your bills. And so, we're all in the same boat. And so right now, I think last time Ed reported, we had about $6 million of unpaid property taxes at the end of April. We're down to, I think, about 4.5, so it's starting to come in. But we really need to know what that looks like to make sure we're actually collecting our property taxes. Now, as you might recall, the due date was extended to June 30th. So many people paid on time as they usually would have, but a lot of people, some people are holding back. And what's unknown is, are they holding back just because they can, or are they holding back because they can't afford to pay it? And they're, a month from now, they're still not going to be able to afford to pay it. And so that's kind of what we need to see how that plays out. And that's why Ed and I, our suggestion has been to do the cut that we suggested, and then see how this plays out. And we have another bite at the apple in the fall. And if everything comes out positive, then we can move forward with some of these other things.
Well, there was just, Rich, I guess, a couple highlights that you haven't really, it's not part of the budget cut presentation, was the overlay issue, as well as, and it's been discussed at the board level, and it's been discussed through some other people with me, is utilizing our full tax levy capability. And I don't mind saying, personally, I support doing that. But I know it's, for some reason, challenged. And one of the reasons I want to bring it up was because this committee, needs to look at some of the components. There's going to be debate over various components of these reductions. And so I want to put on the table, for the benefit of the committee and for the input of the committee and the feedback of the committee, both those as well as other items that people want to discuss now so that we can have some informed discussion prior to making a final recommendation.
So on the levy limit issue, like I said, once we pull all this together, there will be some wiggle room. And when I say wiggle room, what I'm really saying is, as a result of all these adjustments for additional funding sources and budget cuts and things like that, it's going to result in unused excess levy capacity. And so you could use that excess levy capacity to restore cuts, to not use some of the funding sources that we've proposed if you don't like those funding sources, or you could leave it alone and not raise taxes. Or, for example, I'll use the roadways. The roadways is $1.3 million. And so if you had unspent levy capacity by the time we get through this exercise, maybe there's an inclination to want to restore, to the extent you can, that roadway funding. So that would be an opportunity to do that.
But the unused levy capacity doesn't get us past the 2.5% increase. I mean, it gets us, the maximum we can go is the 2.5. So,
Right.
And again, I'm expressing my opinion. I don't understand why we wouldn't do that, but I'm always interested in hearing, especially for my benefit, I guess, what the objections to that would be, other than some people don't want to have their taxes raised a few dollars. Property owners, by the way, people that own houses. Does everybody agree with me that we should, for example, recommend using the unused levy capacity? Is silence assent or disagreement?
I don't agree, Ken, but that's okay.
No, it's not.
It is. I just don't see taxing during this time period that people are struggling to increase their taxes is the right way of balancing the budget. But I know there's levy limit there, but it's still going to mean an increase, a couple bucks or otherwise. I think that's the opposite way we should be going, which is being considerate of the people that are struggling.
And that's why when I pull this presentation together, I'm not going to presume to tell you guys or the selectmen what to do with it. I'm just going to say, here's the cuts that you asked us to pursue. We pursued them, and here's the result. And that results in an unused levy capacity of some amount. And you can decide how you want to apply that.
Yeah. No, Robert, just for your information, I appreciate that comment, because what I'm trying to do is stimulate some conversation that leads us into looking at the components. And that's one to me that jumps out, and whether the committee supports it or doesn't support it has no personal bearing to me other than how I would vote.
I agree with Robert.
Can I ask a couple of questions about this? What's the magnitude of this amount? How much wiggle room do we have? How much funds can we raise, assume we apply all of it?
I think it was 438,000 or something.
Well, that was the amount that's on that sheet, and it might approach that. At this point, I don't want to comment because then we get focused on a certain number.
Yeah.
I'll know that by the end of the week, and we'll get that information out.
So roughly $500,000 is what we're saying. Something's less than that.
It was in that ballpark.
Okay. I appreciate Robert's point about not wanting to raise taxes, but given the demographics of Yarmouth, most of the income I would assume in this town is not being affected. People, given the significant part of the population is retired, they're living off fixed incomes that are going to come whether the economy is doing well or not. So that may have something to do with it. I recognize we also have a significant number of the community that are still working or are still employed and may not be working. Those are the people who are seriously going to be harmed, and I certainly don't want to impose anything on them. I got to know.
Yeah, and second homes. second home.
Well, that part too. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying there's a characteristic of our population that,
Mm.
Makes it different than most other communities in the state.
Ken, I support Robert. I think now's not the time to hit them for every buck they have. I mean, even going to the stores, there's not the sales that there used to be. I mean, everything's full price plus 10. So, I think that if we can cut them a break, no matter how little, it'll help. That's it. Thank you.
Okay,
I mean, I guess I would respond to Nate on that. Yeah, I think we just got to think of how we finance this. It's for the selectmen to make the political decision about, in this particular case, that's, too much given the population. We're not an elected board, so we don't have to worry about that.
well, but the finance committee, first of all, and that's why I'm trying to look at some of the components without going deep on every single one of them. If for no other reason, then the finance committee has to make a decision once the board of selectmen takes a position of looking like we either rubber stamp or carve something out as a recommendation. And quite honestly, it's the vote of the committee. It's with 7 or 8 different points of view, or 8 unanimous points of view. But just really trying to, and I appreciate all the input, I'm just trying to stimulate the conversation around making sure that when we look at these once in a lifetime, hopefully, budget cuts and adjustments, that we recognize that at some point, we, either us or somebody else, could say, why did you do this one or that one? And well, not that we're going to go over every single one of them. Well, Rich has certainly laid it out very, very well. But again, trying to just generate the thought process. I'll give you another example. Stabilization. At least I've come to the feeling that, even though stabilization is really a rainy day fund, and I don't think we've ever seen a rainier day than what we're going through. But the reality to me, and this is my view, is that stabilization is important clearly from a bond rating standpoint and for many other reasons, but that stabilization needs to be maintained if in fact things get worse. And there's a lot of things could get worse. So again, that's because some people might say, why don't you take a couple million out of stabilization and not offset? For example, I think there's some things in there about taking out overtime training payments for police and things like that are going to be questioned. And again, I'll just repeat, trying to make sure that we're looking at the components, not just the total. So.
Ken, to your point, kind of the thinking, and this would be, what your committee and the selectmen will have to consider once we get this in front of you. But part of the thinking with Ed and I is exactly what you just said with the stabilization fund. We have a lot of borrowing coming up with DPW facility, Mattakese, I'm forgetting one, some golf borrowing. And we want to maintain our AAA rating, our AA plus rating. We almost got a AAA if it wasn't for this situation we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
But because we maintain the AA, but with a warning that if you don't take appropriate actions on this budget cycle, that potentially we could downgrade you. So that's why we are one of the reasons why we're providing for the reduction in local receipts to indicate that we're able to maintain a structurally balanced budget, not using one-time sources to balance it out. Holding in reserve that stabilization fund in the event that it gets worse, you've got a fallback. Maybe it doesn't get worse, maybe it improves, but not back to where it was. So therefore, we've got a second year to get through. And then third, the property tax payment issue I mentioned to you. I don't think the whole 4.5 million would be uncollected, but maybe there'll be a higher than usual amount that's uncollected, and we might need it to stopgap that as well. And so, and there's probably some other reasons, but those are kind of the top three on the reserves. At least our thing.
Any other comments, questions? And I will say, I'm sort of reading the tea leaves here, and I think Dan and Richie would probably support this. We need to both get the final numbers as well as absorb this information and think about the things Nate and Robert and George and myself were kicking around here as far as any of the individual components, and I'm sure there's others that we will not be voting on this tonight. Is that probably a safe bet?
Yeah, that's correct. There's no need for a vote. It's a work in progress, kind of a check-in where we're at, just to let you know where we're going. But within 2 weeks for sure, we'll need a vote.
And I know, Dan, last night, maybe for the benefit of the group, last night during the Board of Selectmen presentation, you must have said about 6 or 7 times that in the next week, it sounded like the next week is going to have an avalanche of information. And that's all, it's not all financial, but it includes some of the governor's reopening issues, et cetera.
Yeah.
So you
Well,
might
actually,
wanna-
the governor, he mentioned today, he's not even going to leak anything until the plan comes out on Monday morning, which really hamstrings us because we're trying to get our hands around to get the ball moving. And if we don't know what's coming, we can't be helpful right out of the gate, so.
Yeah.
So, wait and see, but when it comes, it's going to come hard, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the way, I was just on a call before this meeting with Senator Warren's office on a statewide call. They're still under the illusion that there's going to be some CARES Act for public employees, particularly first response communities, teachers, public works and all that. So I'm going to assume, I don't know what the total $1 trillion package is going to look like, but before this is said and done, there'll be some level of aid that'll be released at that level, but we just don't know what it is. And like I said to the board, we can't plan for aid that we don't know. So we need to make sure we have a robust local plan. And then we can, if any federal aid does come in, then we can just restore what we've done for cuts,
Okay, that's aid to the town, not to employees.
Yeah,
Right?
no, it's aid directly to the town to assist in the labor burden. There was a big push on the call. In many communities, the contracts for notification for layoffs have to be done usually by the middle of June. So many folks were of the idea that if based on, there was over 100 communities represented on the call, that if they don't get some sort of signal from Congress soon, across the state, layoff notifications are going to go out to collective bargaining units that total in the thousands, because they just don't have the money for, particularly teachers and school staff for September opening. So that's the backdrop to all this. There's the private sector shoe that we've seen, all the layoffs, but the government by and large at the state and local level has kept working, but the next shoe will drop with them because of our jobs are directly related to appropriations.
Okay.
There was a question I had, but you basically answered it. But the House at least revealed their intention to go 3 trillion today.
Yeah.
And but I haven't read any of the particulars. I don't think anything is in writing. But McConnell is opposed to doing anything at this point.
Yeah.
But I suspect there will be some compromise.
I'm sure there will be, particularly with a presidential election year and all that. I don't think it's going to be 3 trillion, but
No,
it would probably be closer to 2 than it is to 1.
Yeah, there's things in there that aren't necessarily financial either. They load these things up with, whether you agree with them or not, they load them up with stuff that's not necessarily pertinent to the short-term cause. So, but certainly it sounds like it'd be nice to get something for the town.
Yeah, I'd take a couple $1 million right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, further comment, I guess I'll ask this. Is the group comfortable that at this stage of the game, we have information that we feel we can understand, or that if we don't, we know what kind of questions we need to probe at? Because I would like to be able to, if we have to funnel questions, get them out there to Rich and Dan as soon as possible. And I know Robert has already done some of that, and sort of speak now, or in terms of the current understanding of the. That's why when I ask questions of Rich and some of the budget layout, I basically look for the numbers to tie back to another report. Like when there's $631,000 at the bottom line, I like to see where it ties back to that set of 4 components and the changes. So that's the way I look at things. But want to make sure that everybody's comfortable that the material being presented is something that at some point you can feel very comfortable taking a vote on these changes regardless. So if you're comfortable, then that's fine. Okay.
Ken, just on the overlay, just because Robert had asked the question, I'm not sure how much we got back to him. So yeah, had asked the question about what the level of overlay is. Right now, it's about $1.5 million. And as we talked about last time, potentially that's available with a vote of the Board of Assessors to release it as excess overlay, as long as they don't have any pending appellate tax board cases. Typically, they're also going to consider any unpaid taxes. And like I said, right now we've got a lot of unpaid taxes that well in excess of that. So typically a Board of Assessors wouldn't vote to release overlay when you got $4.5 million of unpaid taxes as well. But just for sake of argument, let's say they did. Yeah, that'd be potentially be available. We'll include it on our list of potential reserves. But I just submit that we've got a lot of other reserves that you could probably tap first that might be a little easier, like stabilization or free cash. But out of that 1.5 million of overlay, so how you get at that is, over the last few years, plus or minus, mostly minus, I would say. The starting position is an overlay provision which provides for abatements and exemptions for elderly and for a level of unpaid taxes, which in Yarmouth over the last 10 years has been very low. We've had a great collection percentage. Usually even by the due date, we're very high collection percentage. So you didn't have a lot, but that 500,000 protects you against that. But the actual utilization for abatements and for elderly exemptions, it depends on the year, but generally runs anywhere between 300,000 on a low year to 4 to 420 on a high year. And so, just for sake of argument, if you're doing 400,000 and you provide for 500,000 and you did a good job collecting all your taxes, so you don't have anything on OT at the end of a year, that extra overlay becomes overlay surplus, and that's how you build up to that. It gets built up to that 1.5 million. It's a cumulative amount over a number of years. That's also part of our unreserved general fund balance, as well as free cash. Those are the 2 biggest things that represent that. And that's why one of the reasons why we do get almost got a AAA rating is because of the level of fund balance that we have. That's probably one of the key drivers. So this year, and one of the adjustments we made related to all of this, one of the first things to go if you need to find money would be, instead of 500,000, well, we can't do 500,000. And so I cut that back to 200,000. And so if we have a normal year of $300,000 to $400,000 of abatement and exemption activity, that 200,000 is going to be a little bit short, and that would eat into the $1.5 million of excess that currently exists. And so, if we don't tap that or utilize that reserve for anything, that would, be available to us to have any additional abatement activity over the 200,000 for a number of years.
Is that available at any time during the course of the year?
as long as the Board of Assessors votes to release it.
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah,
when the release is called overlay surplus, and it becomes an available fund, and that then it's very similar to free cash at that point. You have to, town meeting, you need a vote of town meeting to appropriate it.
Okay. And I guess just one more item that, because for the benefit of the committee, it's a financial issue. Ed brought up last night, I guess the consolidation of the bonds, rolling and I'm probably using the wrong terminology, rolling the golf short-term borrowing into a longer-term bond, including DPW and something else. You want to just touch upon that?
Yeah, we have 3 projects that we have to borrow for: Mattakese, or, the new school, I should say, DPW and the golf. And every time you go out to bond, if it's a separate issue, you pay separate issuance costs. And I forget the number Ed quoted, but it's probably in the order of magnitude of 40, 50, 60,000 to do that. And so the idea, instead of doing it 3 times or 2 times, is just do it all at one time and have one set of issuance costs. It's negligible increase doing the 3 versus doing just one. So that's his line of thinking, is you consolidate it and you do it once and you save that money, which makes, seems to make a lot of sense. And you're trying to cut the budget. You don't need to be compounding your problem by adding extra costs that you don't necessarily need to do. And it's also a good opportunity. I think Robert's pointed this out. If there's ever a time to borrow, this might be it. Rates are low and expected to be low for the foreseeable future. So it might be an opportune time to do that and line up other projects we need to do. But I think at least our contemplation is let's wait till the fall, see how this shakes out a little bit and get a little bit better sense of where we stand. And then you'll be in a good position to go from there.
Yeah, one of the caveats to that would be that Ed brought up is the golf borrowing, whether it would be subject to being taxable or tax exempt because of if you wanted to privatize golf. So golf represents an interesting conundrum for us because we're already in significant deficit with it now. It already owed the town significant money. And with the tee times being at 15-minute intervals, it cuts our tee sheet in half every day. And if that stays on through the summer, that scenario, we are artificially being held at literally probably 50% of our greens capacity. That coupled with, depending upon what the damage is done with the restaurants have performed marginally well and they've given us some additional money. By the time, even though golf is open, by the time the summertime closes on it, I'm sure the debt will be significantly much larger than it presently is now.
And that is different from the debt exclusion vote that'll be on the ballot on June 30th, which is for the school.
For the school, that's correct, right? And so just so everybody on the finance committee knows, if we don't pass that, we will continue, obviously the school project continues to move forward. There's costs incurred and we have probably up to 24 months to try to get a debt exclusion vote before a fully loaded principal and interest payment would hit our books, because at some point after construction and you've been cleared by MSBA, you would look to bring that final borrowing to market. So it's a worst case scenario. You're in a pandemic. People are nervous about their finances. It's a local election, not a big turnout to begin with. And it's probably going to be even further suppressed because people might be afraid to come to the polls. All lining up for right now.
What happens if
think
they vote that down?
Yeah.
What happens if that's voted down?
Well, so if it's voted down, we have secured money in the budget to continue paying the interest on the borrowing done to date. It's not a very large sum. So we would try at the next possible time, which probably we would not want to do a special election, but we could probably maybe, I think, do it if it votes down. We could probably try it again at the state primary on September 1st, because we do have a select board candidate on the ballot on that date now.
But Brian, to your point, it's an assessment that would be charged to us by the district that we'd be obligated to pay. If we didn't get a debt exclusion to raise that money through the property tax levy, then we'd have to find whatever the value of that debt service is, probably north of $3 million. within our budget. We'd have to cut our budget 3 million to accommodate that assessment. We're having a
Okay.
tough time cutting 600.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? We'll move on in the agenda, but we clearly will have to meet one more time prior to June 2nd. Dan, would your advice be to meet, if just to pick a Wednesday, since that's what we do, the 27th?
Yeah, the Wednesday after Memorial Day works out perfect. That'll be going into the public hearing. We'll have all the details for you. And then everything that we need to know from the state will be known probably. By the way,
Okay.
I'll just preface that, Ken, if I could. The state, we have, in a number of years, have not had a budget delivered from the state by July 1, even in a good year. It is astonishing to me how quiet it's been in Boston about constructing an FY21 budget. Leads me to believe that we won't even have a state budget for many, many months into the summer. They're talking about tax projections taken. I think I sent the letter to that I got from the Senate Ways and Means Chairman. $5.5 billion shortfall in the state proposed budget. And that, of course, you think about the cuts we've got to make, take that by 200 legislators got to come to agreement on. You need a majority of that,
Yeah,
So-
and we can't print money like the federal
That's-
government.
We have to have a balanced budget. That's correct.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, must be nice to throw
Yeah.
a trillion around here, a trillion around there.
It's only nice if I get some of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, I'll use all my connections. Okay, any other questions before we move on? See if there's any transfers, and then we'll schedule the next meeting.
No transfers that I'm aware of.
Okay. So the only administrative item would be that we'll move forward towards a meeting on May 27th. And at that point, we should be fully informed as to how we would vote on these recommendations. And then after that, we'll only have a few days, but frankly, Dan, from a presentation standpoint for a public hearing, we can probably just piggyback on whatever the Board of Selectmen or whatever the material looks like and just make some commentary or addendums. This is not a full-blown 4-page PowerPoint thing, correct?
No, our presentation to them is going to be, really focused in on those sheets that Rich had indicated. We'll have updated budget sheets on the impact, but certainly what you see on that Wednesday night will be exactly what we go into the hearing with.
Okay, all right, good. Anything else? Appreciate everything you folks are doing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ken, I just want to add, no transfers tonight, as Dan said, but did talk to the chief about his budget today. And you can expect some, a transfer probably for your next meeting related to FY20. Relatively low magnitude, but I just want to give you a heads up.
Okay. Would be disappointed if you didn't have one, so.
Well, Ken, on the good news note, we're not talking about LOD shortfalls, right?
Right. Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn for 2 weeks? Jack's not here.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Robert,
second it.
Jessica second, somebody second. Okay.
Brian.
All in favor? I'm going to take a roll call. Sarah,
Aye.
Jessica,
Aye.
George,
Right.
Robert,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
myself, aye. Okay. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I will get all the material out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.